This is J. Krishnamurti's second public talk in London, 1969.
For most of us, freedom is an idea, but not an actuality. When we talk about freedom or think about it, we want to be free outwardly, to do what we like. To travel, free to express ourselves in different ways, free to think what we like. The outward expression of freedom seems to be extraordinarily important, especially in countries where there is tyranny, dictatorship. And in those countries where outward freedom is possible, one seeks more and more pleasure, more and more enjoyment, freedom to possess. And in the search for freedom, if one is at all serious, there is not only the outward expression of that freedom, which must, it seems to me, must come from psychological freedom, the inward freedom. And if we were to inquire deeply what that freedom implies, freedom to be inwardly, completely and totally free, which then expresses itself outwardly in society, in relationship, then we must ask, it seems to me, whether human mind, heavily conditioned as it is, can ever be free at all? Or must it always live and function within the frontiers of its own conditioning, and therefore there is no freedom at all? Or verbally understanding that there is no freedom here on this earth, inwardly or outwardly, one then begins to invent freedom in another world, liberation, moksha, heaven, and so on. So if we could put aside all theoretical, ideological concepts of freedom and actually inquire whether our minds, yours and mine, can ever be free. Freedom from dependence, psychologically, inwardly. Freedom from fear, anxiety, the innumerable problems, both conscious as well as deeper layers of consciousness. Whether there can be complete psychological freedom so that the human mind, being freed from all problems, can come upon something which is not of time, which is not put together by thought, or as an escape from the actual realities of daily existence. If we could this morning go into this question, whether the human mind, yours and mine, can ever be inwardly, psychologically, totally free. Because without that freedom, it is not possible to see what is truth, to see if there is a reality, not invented by fear, not shaped by the society, the culture in which we live. Not as an escape from the daily monotony, the boredom, the loneliness, the despair, the anxiety. Because unless one is free, you can't explore. You can't investigate. You can't examine. And to look into it, there needs not only freedom, but the discipline that is necessary to observe. So freedom and discipline go together. Not that one must be disciplined in order to be free. We are using the word discipline not in the accepted traditional sense, which is to conform, imitate, suppress, follow a set pattern, but rather the root meaning of that word itself, which is to learn. So learning and freedom go together. Learning being, bringing its own discipline, not imposed by the mind in order to achieve a certain result. So those two things are necessary, essentially. The act of learning and freedom. One cannot learn about oneself unless one is free. And to learn about oneself, one must observe. Not according to any pattern, formula, or concept, but actually observe as one is. And that observation, that perception, that seeing, brings about its own discipline, its own learning, in which there is no conformity, imitation, suppression, control whatsoever. So freedom and learning are always together. And there is a great deal of beauty in that. Our minds are conditioned. That's an obvious fact. Conditioned by the culture, by the society, influenced by various impressions, strains, stresses, relationships, economic, social, climate, educational, religious conformity, sanctions, and so on. And our minds are trained to accept fear and escape, if we can, from that fear. Never being able to resolve totally and completely the whole nature and structure of fear. So our first question is whether the mind, so heavily burdened, can resolve completely not only its conditioning, but also its fears. Because it is the fear that makes us accept conditioning. And if we may, this morning, please do not merely hear a lot of words and ideas which are really no value at all, but through the act of listening, observing your own states of mind, then we can together, both verbally and non-verbally, inquire whether the mind can ever be free from fear. Not accepting fear, not escaping from it. Not saying one must develop courage, resistance, but actually be fully aware of the fear in which one is trapped. Because unless one is free from this quality of fear, one can't see very clearly, feel very clearly, deeply. And obviously, when there is fear, there is no love. So whether the mind can actually ever be free of fear, that seems to me one of the most primary, essential questions which must be asked and which must be resolved For any person who is at all serious, there are physical fears and psychological fears. The physical fears of pain, having had pain and the repetition of that pain in the future. The fears of old age, death. The fears of physical insecurity. The fears of uncertainties of tomorrow. The fears of not being able to be a great success, achieve, and so on. Not being somebody in this rather ugly world. The fears of destruction. The fears of loneliness. Not being able to love or be loved. And so on. The conscious fears as well as the unconscious fears. Can the mind be free totally of all this? And if it cannot, then such a mind is incapable because it is distorted. It's incapable of perception, of understanding, of having a mind that's completely silent, quiet. It's like a blind man seeking light and never finding light, and therefore inventing a light of words, concepts, theories. So how is a mind which is so heavily burdened with fear and with all its conditioning ever to be free of it? Or must we accept it as inevitable thing of life? And most of us do accept it, put up with it. So, now what shall we do? How shall I, as a human being, and you as a human being, be rid of this fear, the total fear, not a particular fear, but the whole nature and structure of fear? What is fear? Don't accept, if I may suggest, what the speaker is saying. The speaker has no authority whatsoever. He is not a teacher. He is not a guru. Because if he is a teacher, then you are the follower. And if you are the follower, you destroy yourself as well as the teacher. What we are trying to do is to find out what is truth. We're trying to go into this question of fear so completely that your mind is never afraid. Therefore, you're free of all dependence on another, inwardly, psychologically. So we are taking a journey together, not being led. Someone ahead of you and you following in his footsteps. The beauty of freedom is that you don't leave a mark. The eagle in its flight doesn't leave a mark. Only the scientist does. And in inquiring into this question of freedom, there must be not only the scientific observation, but also the flight of the eagle that doesn't leave a mark at all. Both are required, which is both the verbal explanation and the non-verbal perception. Bearing in mind that the description is never the described. The explanation is never that thing which is explained. That is, the word is never the thing. So if all this is very clear, then we can proceed to find out for ourselves, not through the speaker, not through his words, not through his ideas or thought, to find out for ourselves whether the mind can be completely free from fear. All right, shall we go on from there? Please, this is not an introduction. If you haven't heard the first part clearly and understood it, you can't go on to the next. And to inquire, there must be freedom, as we said. To look. Freedom from prejudice, conclusions, concepts, ideals, prejudices, so that you can observe actually for yourself what is fear. And when you observe very closely, intimately, is there fear at all? That is, you can only observe very, very closely, intimately, what is fear, when the observer is the observed. And we're going to go into that. So what is fear? How does it come about? The obvious physical fears can be understood, like the dangers, physical dangers, in which there is instant response. That's fairly easy to understand, into which we need not go too much. But we're talking about psychological fears. How do these psychological fears arise? What is their origin? And whether they can end. That's the issue. What is fear? Fear of something that happened yesterday. Fear of something that might happen later on today or tomorrow. Fear of the known and fear of the unknown, which is tomorrow. The unknown being death and all the rest of it. We won't touch that into that question, go into that question this morning. So, one can see for oneself very clearly that fear arises through the structure of thought. Thought, thinking about what happened yesterday, of which one is afraid, thinking about it, or thinking about the future, causes fear. Right? Thought breeds fear. No? Please, sirs, be quite sure. Don't accept what we're talking about, what the speaker is saying. Be absolutely sure for yourself that thought is the origin of fear. Thinking about the pain, psychological pain one has had some time ago, and not wanting to repeat it again, or have that thing recalled, or happen, and thought, thinking about all this breeds fear. Right? Can you go on from there? No, because unless we see this very clearly, you won't be able to follow. Please don't ask questions yet. It's quite complex, this, so please, for the moment, just hold on to your question. No, don't hold on to your question. Drop your question, go on with it, what we're talking about. Thought, thinking about an incident, an experience, a state in which there has been a disturbance, danger, grief, pain, brings about fear. Thought, having established a certain security, psychologically, and not wanting that security to be disturbed, any disturbance is a resistance, and therefore fear. So thought is responsible for fear, as thought is responsible for pleasure. Right? One has had a happy experience. Thought thinks about it and wants it repeated, perpetuated. And when that is not possible, there is a resistance. there's anger, despair, and fear. So thought is both responsible for fear as well as pleasure. Right? This is not a verbal conclusion. This is not a formula for avoiding fear. That is, where there is fear, there is pain and pleasure. Pleasure goes with pain. The two are indivisible. And thought is responsible for both. Right? If there was no tomorrow or the next moment to think about either fear or pleasure, then neither exist. Right, sirs? Shall we go on from there? Please bear in mind, not as an idea, but an actuality, the thing that you yourself have discovered and therefore real. So you say, by Joe, I've found out for yourself that thought breeds both these things. You have had sexual enjoyment, pleasure. Then you think about it, the image, the pictures, the whole business of it. And the very thinking about it gives strength to that pleasure which you have had. And when that is thwarted, there is pain, anxiety, fear, jealousy, annoyance, anger, brutality. So thought is the origin of both. And we're not saying that you must not have pleasure. Bliss is not pleasure. Ecstasy is not brought about by thought. It's an entirely different thing. And you can only come upon that when you understand the nature of thought, which breeds both pleasure and fear. And when a mind seeks bliss or ecstasy, and there is such a thing which is not pleasure, and to understand that there must be real inquiry and understanding of fear and pleasure which is brought about by thought. So, then the question arises, can one stop thought? You're following all this? If thought breeds fear and pleasure, and where there is pleasure, there must be pain, which is fairly obvious. Then one asks oneself, can thought come to an end? Which doesn't mean the ending of perception of beauty, the enjoyment of beauty. It's like seeing the beauty of a cloud or a tree, and be complete and enjoy it totally, completely, fully. But when thought says, I must have that same experience tomorrow, that same delight which I had yesterday when I saw that cloud, that tree, that flower, that face of that beautiful person, then it invites both disappointment, pain, fear, and pleasure tomorrow. Obvious, isn't it? So can thought come to an end? Or is that a wrong question altogether? It's the wrong question because we want to experience an ecstasy, a bliss which is not pleasure. Therefore, we hope by ending thought we'll come upon something which is immense, which is not the product of pleasure and fear. So then our question then is, what place has thought in life? Right? Not how to end thought. What is there? What is the relationship of thought in action and in inaction? Right? What is the relationship of thought where action is necessary and why does thought come into existence at all when there is complete enjoyment of beauty? So that it doesn't carry it over tomorrow. I want to find out where thought is necessary. And it is necessary in action. And I also see that where there is complete enjoyment of beauty of a mountain, of a beautiful face, or a sheet of water, why should thought come there and give a twist to it and say, I must have that pleasure again tomorrow? So I have to find out what is a relationship of thought in action and thought must not interfere, which is when there is no action of thought at all. Am I making myself clear? Look, I see a beautiful tree without a single leaf against the sky. It's extraordinarily beautiful. And that's enough, finished. Why should thought come in and say, well, I must have that same delight tomorrow? Now you also see that thought must operate in action. skill in action is also skill in thought. Which is really yoga, not merely physical exercise. Yoga also means skill in action, which we won't go into for the moment. So, what is the actual relationship between thought and action? Our action is now based on a concept, an idea. I have an idea or knowledge of what should be done. And what should be done is in approximation to the concept, to the idea, to the ideal. Right? So there is a division between action and the concept, the ideal. This should be. In this division there is conflict. Right? Any division, psychological division, must breed conflict. And I'm asking myself, what is the relationship of thought in action? If action is separated from the idea, then action is incomplete. Right? Because in that there is a separation, division, conflict. Therefore action is incomplete. So, is there an action of thought which sees something instantly and acts immediately? Right? And therefore no division, no conflict. And therefore there is not an idea, an ideology, and something to be acted on separate. Right? Is there an action which is the very seeing is the acting, and therefore the very thinking is the action? Right? I see there is the perception that thought breeds fear and pleasure. And where there is pleasure, there must be pain, and therefore resistance to pain. I see that very clearly. The seeing of it is the immediate action. And the seeing of it requires perceptions, thought, logic, thinking very clearly, all that is involved. And the seeing of it is instantaneous, and therefore the action is instantaneous, therefore freedom from it. That means you are a free human being, a different human being, totally transformed. Not tomorrow, but now. Because you see very clearly that thought breeds both fear and pain and pleasure. And all our values are based on that. Moral, ethical, social, religious, spiritual, all the values are based on that. And if you see the truth of it, and to see the truth of it, you have to be astonishingly aware, logically, healthily, sanely observe every movement of thought. Then that very perception is total action. Therefore, when you leave, you're completely out of it. Otherwise, you will say, how am I to be free of fear tomorrow? So, thought must operate in action. And it does operate. When you are to go to your house, you must think. Catch the bus, train, and all the rest of it, or go to the office. More efficiently, more objectively, not personally, not emotionally, the more vital the thought is. But when thought carries on that experience that you have had as a delight, carries on through memory into the future, then such action is incomplete. Therefore, it is a form of resistance, and so on. Right? So then we can go on to the next question. Thought, now let's put it that way. What is the origin of thought? And what is the thinker? One can say thought is the response of memory, which is fairly simple to understand. Accumulated memory, knowledge, experience, the background from which there is a response to any challenge. Where you live, if you're asked, there is instant response. And so on. So memory, experience, knowledge is the background of thought. But thought, which is always old, can never be free. You may express itself freely, but it is always old. And therefore, thought can never say anything new. So when I understand that very clearly, then the mind becomes quiet. Right? Because life is a movement. It's a constant movement in relationship. And thought trying to capture that movement in terms of the past is afraid of life. Right? And so, then the question is, seeing all this, seeing freedom is necessary to examine, And to examine very clearly, there must be the discipline of learning and not of suppression, imitation. Seeing how the mind is conditioned. By society, by the past. And the mind, the brain is the past. And all thought springing from that is old. And therefore it cannot possibly understand anything new. And to understand the mind must be completely quiet. Not controlled, not shaped to be quiet. Now, seeing all that, actually seeing it, not theoretically, then there is an action from that perception, or that very perception is the action of liberation from fear. Right? So when next occasion the fear, any fear arises, there is immediate perception of it and the ending of it. Are we going along together? See, from this arises, perhaps we have no time to go into it this morning. What is love? For most of us, it's fear, pleasure, which we call love. And when there is no fear and the understanding of pleasure, then what is love? And who is going to answer this question? The speaker, the priest, the book, some outside agency to tell us you're doing marvelously well and carry on? Or having examined, observed, seen non-analytically, this whole structure and nature of pleasure, fear, pain, and therefore understood that the observer, the thinker, is part of thought. Because if there is no thinking, there is no observer, thinker. The two are inseparable. The thinker is the thought. So seeing all that, and the beauty of all that, the subtlety of all that, then where is the mind that started to inquire into this question of fear? You understand? Where now, what is the state of the mind now that has gone through all this? Is it the same as it was before it came here? Or has it seen this thing very intimately seen the nature and the beauty of this thing called thought, fear, pleasure, seeing all that, what is the actual state of the mind now? Obviously, nobody can answer that except yourself. And if you have actually observed it, gone into it, you will see that it has become completely transformed. And to find out, actually, if there is such freedom, one must be aware of one's own conditioning, the problems, the daily monotonous life of shallowness, emptiness, insufficiency, and above all, fear. If we can, this morning, go into this question rather deeply, I think it would be eminently worthwhile to be aware of oneself, not introspectively or analytically, but actually be aware as one is, and see if it is at all possible to be entirely free of all those issues that seem to clog the mind. Because to explore, as we're going to do, there must be freedom. Not at the end, but right at the beginning. Am I alone working, or are you also working? Huh? Are you also working? I hope so. It's your life, it's not my life. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. First, let me put this question. You see, I like personally not to repeat what I said in California about this question. I can't repeat what was said 10 days ago. It bores me to repeat. But I want to find a new way of coming upon it. Therefore, it's rather difficult to find a new set of words. What is Are we communicating with each other? Voyons, madame, attendez. Go slowly, this is quite difficult. Please don't say so easily yes. Because if you say yes, when you leave the hall, you must be free of fear. Your saying a yes is merely a verbal assertion that you have understood verbally, intellectually, which is nothing at all. You and I are here this morning investigating into the question of fear. And when you leave the hall, there must be complete freedom from it. Does all this interest you? Huh? Please, it doesn't matter, you know. You may like, it's a nice warm hall, perhaps you like to sit quietly after the cold out there. But if you're really serious, and I hope you are, you must find out for yourself the origin of thought. What is the thinker? What is the observer? The experiencer? From which thought comes. And so thought is never new. Thought is always old. Thought can never be free because it's tied to the past. Freedom of thought in the communist world is necessary for the people to say, I must think very clearly, I must express myself, I must write, I must do what I like. Because they're suppressed. There is no system, method. It doesn't matter whether it's in Japan, in Zen, or in India, to make the mind quiet. That is the most stupid thing to do. To discipline itself, to discipline it to be quiet. Good God. Right, sir. Can we now proceed to, if we wish, ask questions? Just a minute, madam, just a minute, Sir, I can't hear because everybody is moving, talking, coughing. It's one of the easiest things to ask a question. And probably some of us have been thinking what our question is while the speaker was going on. We are more concerned with our question than with listening. And so, one has to ask questions, not only here but everywhere, of ourselves. And to ask the right question. is far more important than to receive the answer. Because the solution of a problem lies in the understanding of the problem. The answer is not outside the problem. It's in the problem. And we cannot look at the problem very clearly if we are concerned with the answer, with the solution of the problem. And as most of us are so eager to resolve the problem without looking into it, and to look into it, one has to have energy, drive, intensity, a passion. And as most of us are rather indolent, lazy, though we have problems, we'd rather somebody else solve them. And there is nobody going to solve any of our problems, either political, religious, psychological, or any problem. One has to have a great deal of vitality and passion, intensity, to look, to observe the problems. And as you observe, the answer is there very clearly. So please, this doesn't mean that you mustn't ask questions. On the contrary, you must ask questions. You must doubt everything everybody has said, including that of the speaker.
Is there a danger of introspection in looking into personal problems?
Is there a danger in looking into personal problems?
Danger of introspection.
Danger of introspection. Why shouldn't there be danger? You know, to cross the street is a danger. You mean to say we mustn't look because it is dangerous to look? I remember once, if I may repeat an incident, a very, very rich man once came to see us, and he said, "I'm very, very serious about what you're talking about. And I want to resolve all my, all the rest of the nonsense these people talk about." And I said, "All right, sir, let's go into it." And we talked. He came several times. He was really a multimillionaire. And about the second week, he came to me, he said, "I'm having dreadful dreams, frightening dreams. I seem to see everything around me disappearing," and all kinds of things he went into. And he said, "Probably this is the result of my inquiry into myself. And I see the danger of it." And after that, he didn't come at all. We all want to be safe. We all want to be secure in our petty little world, the world of well-established order, which is disorder, the world of our particular relationship, which we don't want to be disturbed, the relationship between the wife and the husband, and therefore they hold together tight. And in that there is misery, there is distrust, there is fear, there is danger, jealousy, anger, domination, all the rest of it. So, there is a way of looking into ourselves without fear, without danger. That is to look without any condemnation, without any justification, just to look. Not to interpret, not to judge, not to evaluate. And to do that, the mind must be eager to learn in its observation of what is. What is the danger in what is? Human beings are violent. That's actually what is. And the danger that I have brought about in the world is the result of this violence, which is the outcome of fear. What is there dangerous about it? To observe it and to completely eradicate that fear. We may bring about a different society, different values. You see, there is great beauty in observation, in seeing things as they are, psychologically, inwardly, which doesn't mean one accepts things as they are. It doesn't mean that one rejects or wants to do something about what is. The very perception of what is brings about its own mutation. But one must know the art of looking. And the art of looking is never the introspective art or the analytical art, but just to observe without any choice.
Is there a fear which is not derived from thought, but spontaneous, immediate, like an animal, a child, a spirit?
Is there not, the question asks, spontaneous fear? Would you call that fear? When you know fire burns, when you see a precipice, to jump away from it, when you see a wild animal, a snake, to withdraw, is that fear? Or is it intelligence? That intelligence may be the result of conditioning, because you have been conditioned to the dangers of a precipice. If you are not, you would throw yourself and that would be the end of you. So your intelligence tells you be careful. And is that intelligence fear? And watch it. Is it intelligence that operates when we divide ourselves into nationalities, into religious groups? This division between you and me and we and they, is that intelligence that is in operation in this division, which brings about danger, which divides people, which brings war? Is that intelligence operating? Or fear? There is fear and the other is not. So in other words, we have fragmented ourselves in part of us acts intelligently where necessary, like a precipice, like a bus going by, but we are not intelligent enough to see the dangers of nationalism, the dangers of division between people. So one part of us, very little part of us is intelligent, the rest of us is not. And where there is fragmentation, there must be conflict, there must be misery. And that is the very essence of conflict when there is division, contradiction in us. And the contradiction is not to be integrated. And this one of our peculiar idiosyncrasy says that we must integrate ourselves. I don't know what it means really. Who is it that is going to integrate the two dividing, opposing natures? Is not the integrator himself part of that division? But when one sees the totality of it, perception of it, without any choice, in which there is no division, in seeing there is no division.
Did you say, sir, that correct thought and action are the same, or that they are different and occur simultaneously?
I couldn't quite hear.
You say that correct thought and correct action are the same thing, or are they different and they only occur simultaneously?
Sorry, I must go. Wait, sir. I've answered a question. Let me take a breather. What's the question, sir?
Is there any difference between correct thought and correct action?
Is there any difference between correct thought and correct action? Is there any difference between correct thought and correct action? When you use that word correct, between thought and action, then that correct action is incorrect action. Right? When you use the word correct, you have already an idea what is correct, right? And when you have an idea what is already correct, it is incorrect. Because that correct is based on your prejudice, on your conditioning, on your fear, on your culture, on your society, on your own particular idiosyncrasies, fears, religious sanctions, and so on. So you have the norm, the pattern, and in that very pattern is in itself incorrect, is immoral. The social immorality, the social morality is immoral. Right? Yes? You agree to that? Then you have rejected social morality. Which means greed, envy, ambition, nationality, the worship of class, fear, all the rest of that. Have you? When you say yes, social morality is immoral, do you really mean it? Or it's just a lot of words? So, to be really moral, virtuous is one of the most extraordinary things in life. And that morality has nothing whatsoever to do with the social, environmental behavior. That's why one must be free to be really virtuous. And you are not free if you follow the social morality of greed, envy, competition, worship of success, all that thing that is put forward by the church and by the society as being moral. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned about the quiet mind and immediate perception. Could you put more light on it, whether it is in
Yes, what? Yes.
ability to wait in passivity, because you denied the discipline, external discipline, if I can.
Do we have to wait for it to happen, or is there some discipline we can use to make it happen?
Must we use a discipline to see that the very seeing is action? No?
When you talk about the quiet mind, is it the result of discipline?
Ha.
Or is it?
Would you talk about the quiet mind? Is it the result of discipline or is it not? Oh Lord. So, look, a soldier on the drill ground, he's very quiet, isn't he? Straight back, holds the rifle all the rest of it is drilled. Drilled day after day, day after day. Any freedom is destroyed for him, right? And he's very quiet. Is that quietness? Like a child, absorbed in a toy. Is that quietness? Remove the toy, the boy becomes what he is. So will discipline understand this once and for all? It's so simple. Does discipline bring about quietness? It may bring about dullness, a state of stagnancy. But does it become quiet? Quiet in the sense intensely active and therefore quiet.
So, sir, what do you want us people here on this world to do?
What do you want us, sir, to do living in this world, on this earth? Very simple, sir. I don't want anything. That's first. Second, live. Live in this world. This world is so marvelously beautiful. It's our world, our earth to live upon. But we don't live. We are frightened, we are narrow, we are separate, we are anxious, we are frightened human beings. Therefore we do not live, we have no relationship. We are isolated, despairing human beings. And therefore we don't know what it means to live in that ecstatic, blissful sense. And I say you can live that way only when we know how to be free from all the stupidities of life and to be free from them. And to be free from them is only possible in becoming aware of our relationship, not only with human beings, but our relationship with ideas, with nature, with everything. In that relationship we discover what we are, which is fear, anxiety, despair, loneliness, the utter lack of love. We are full of theories, words, knowledge of other people, what other people have said. We know nothing about ourselves, and therefore we don't know how to live. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a? Comment? I can't. Sir, I haven't really quite understood. I can't hear properly.
How do you explain different levels of consciousness in terms of the human brain?
How do you explain different levels of consciousness in terms of the human brain? Is that it? Est-ce que vous avez compris?
The brain seems to be a physical affair. The mind doesn't seem to be a physical affair. In addition, the mind seems to have a conscious part and an unconscious part. How do we see any clarity in all these different ideas?
The brain is a physical affair. The mind is not quite. And in the mind there are various divisions. Divisions, conscious and various forms of layers of consciousness. Then what is the question? How do you?
Is it physical? Is it not physical? What is it? What's the difference between mind and brain?
What is the difference between the mind and the brain? Is that it, sir? Without the actual physical brain, which is the result of the past, which is the outcome of evolution of many thousand yesterdays, with all its memories and knowledge and experience, isn't that brain part of this total mind? The mind in which there is a conscious level and the unconscious level. Isn't all that part of consciousness? The physical as well as the non-physical, psychological? Isn't all that one whole? And haven't we divided it? As the conscious, as the unconscious, the brain and not the brain? Can we look at the this whole thing as a total affair, non-fragmented, is the unconscious so very different from the conscious? Or is it part of the totality, but we have divided it? And from that arises the question, how is the conscious mind to be aware of the unconscious? Can the positive, which is the operative, the thing that's working all day, can that observe the unconscious? I don't know if we have time to go into this. Do you want to go into it now? You do? Aren't you tired? Is this an entertainment? I fear it might become an entertainment. Let me finish this, sir. Let me finish this. Please, sirs, don't reduce it to an entertainment. It's a nice warm room, sitting there, listening to some voice. Because we are dealing with very, very serious things. And if you have worked as one should have, then you must be awfully tired. Your brain can't take more than a certain amount. And to go into this question of the unconscious and the conscious, the brain, or the whole thing requires a very sharp, clear mind to observe. And I doubt very much if at the end of an hour and a half you're capable of it. So may we, if you will, take up this question on Thursday evening, may we? So may I go now?